pocket of his work pants. It was a .38 special with a snub nose that he'd picked up on the cheap from a pawn shop that was known to sell illegal heat. Ken hadn't wanted or needed a hot gun, but that was the only kind he'd been able to afford. The one in his pocket had its serial number shaved off, but had been no less neutered or disguised in the doing. Ken had seen enough Magnum P.I. and Hill Street Blues to know that the marks a gun left on a bullet from the grooves and lands inside the barrel were a weapon's real fingerprint. Not that it mattered in this case. You couldn't catch a dead man. Ken parked in the McDonald's lot and took a drink from the can of Coke wedged between his knees. Caffeine wasn't much of a drug for this sort of thing, but it was all he was allowing himself. He turned the key in the ignition to shut off the car, ran his hand over the revolver again, and then exited the vehicle. It was time to die. Gail Russo did not enjoy fast food. Her twin boys, Josh and Jacob, 4 and only a year away from kindergarten, loved the stuff. They were chicken nugget connoisseurs, French fry freaks, sultans of shakes. Gail ate on these trips only occasionally. Her palate hadn't been destroyed by watching her children motor through greasy fast food, but she had found her enjoyment of even something as simple as a hamburger diminished with every visit. It wasn't just the food, of course, it was everything. Her and Ryan's decision to get pregnant had never seen a conversation about twins. As far as she knew, neither of their families even had a history of such a thing. Still, a pair of blessings had pushed kicking and screaming into the world a little over 4 years ago, and it was less than 2 weeks later before Gail knew in her heart that there would be no triumphant return to the nursing job that she loved after 10 weeks of leave. There was no way any daycare was going to put up with her 2 colicky little screamers, and a small part of her was selfishly glad for it. They had no family in the area. Ryan had moved here for work, and Gail had settled in after moving from Michigan's Upper Peninsula for school, making the impossible decision after graduation. She liked living in a bigger city. It just fit. That decision meant that she met Ryan Russo after an embarrassing and drunken touch football injury saw him admitted to the emergency room for stitches. He'd been tackled onto a sprinkler. A week later, flowers showed up at the hospital, but the card with them had her name instead of a patient's. The rest just happened. Still, living so far from family had its consequences, the primary one being no reliable sitters. That meant no more date nights out and no more work, at least for her. As for Ryan, he seemed to work even more since the twins had been born. Gail loved him for the sacrifice, and secretly resented him for not being home, a dual-edged blade of emotions on which she did her best not to teeter, lest he see her as being a naggy brat. Her husband wasn't the type to enter into some daytime tryst with a slutty secretary, despite what the soap operas seemed to suggest, but she still didn't want to be the one nagging him into an affair. Her attention snapped back to the twins as Josh, the food in front of him somehow gone, asked, "Can we play now?" She considered the question, then looked at Jacob's plate. His food was missing as well. "Of course," she said, and the 2 boys charged fearlessly into the dangerous-looking area populated by Ronald, Grimace, and the gang. Both of the boys were looking at her through the bars acting as the teeth of the Mayor McCheese statue/prison that they seemed to love so much. Somehow they'd ascended the ladder and turned to face her before she'd even stood. "You 2 be good," said Gail. "I'm going to throw out your trash, and then we have a half hour before it's time to go grocery shopping." Gail grabbed the greasy, ketchup-covered brown trays, making sure to remove the toys from them, and then walked into the main part of the restaurant. She could hear someone arguing with the manager, and she rolled her eyes as she slid the tray liners and crud into the trash cans. The explosion made her jump, and the angry parent in her wanted to find the idiot who was setting off firecrackers and give him or her a talking to. Then the noise happened again, and Gail noticed that the argument at the front of the store had stopped and that someone was screaming. Gail looked to the front of the store.